Welcome to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast for farmers and ag professionals by the Iowa Farm Bureau, bringing you the news, experts, and educational insights that matter most. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our June 14th edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler, and today's episode will prepare you for a deep dive into the private sector sustainability markets available to farmers. Today, you'll hear some basics from Iowa Farm Bureau senior economist Dr. Sam Funk and American Farm Bureau economist Shelby Myers. And by the time we're done here, you'll be all set to dig even deeper into these markets during Iowa Farm Bureau's virtual roundtable on July 14th, which is titled Carbon Credit Markets, What Farmers Need to Know. For more on that roundtable and the important questions it's going to answer for farmers, we'll hand things over to Spokesman editor Dirk Steimel with Iowa Farm Bureau's senior economist, Dr. Sam Funk.
Hi, Sam. What was the impetus for organizing this virtual roundtable?
Well, the real fact is that we know a lot of things are changing about the whole climate and payment situation. So we've had a lot of discussion about federal programs and where that may lead, but that's not the focus of this event. This one is based to look at the private sector programs that are already being offered or that are coming onto the marketplace right now, just to give that perspective of questions that farmers have about these programs and to try to learn more and to try to discern, is this an opportunity that they should take advantage of right now, or is there something else out in the future that they need to be aware of as they would consider these programs?
What kind of questions are you getting from farmers about these emerging markets?
All sorts of questions. Obviously, some of the questions go around, we're getting so many of these, how do we even begin to discern which one we should try to take a look at enrolling in? So what are the practices that they're going to mandate? What are the results that they're going to measure to determine if I'm going to get a payment or not? What payment levels are through there? How long do I need to be engaged in these programs? These are all very valid questions that need to be addressed, and there's so many more. You know, would this program mandate that I have no-till? And for how long would I have to have no-till? What happens if I get increasing weed pressure and I need to have some sort of a tillage practice in place to be able to control those weeds? Just again, the questions become so many, and they actually are based upon the duration of how long you'd be in that program and how they're going to measure that program and how producers would be able to find those benefits and get paid for those. So there's a lot of questions that we'll try to develop into this scenario. And so what we will do is we will start off with an overarching set of presentations for what considerations, what got us, if you will, to this point in time looking at these programs. And then we'll talk about some of the considerations that people might have on a general basis. And then we're going to bring to this roundtable actual providers of these climate or carbon credit programs. It's not all carbon, and that's an important aspect that we'll have to consider as well. And we will ask these questions of them. What do you see for some of these questions that farmers have, and actually be able to draw out from them some of the questions that they would suggest that people ask. One of the best things that you can do is to actually visit and learn more, and part of it is that part of the providers will actually tell you what they think you might want to ask.
You've mentioned that not all of these climate programs are based on carbon. What are some of the other types of sustainable practices that farmers could potentially be paid for?
Sure. So one of the big terms that actually producers probably see in a number of these programs is ecosystem services. So it doesn't necessarily have to be about carbon sequestration or trying to be based on a carbon credit. It could be things such as water quality. It could be things such as trying to reduce soil erosion. There's a number of different factors which can come into place that are beyond carbon alone or measuring carbon or doing things just for carbon. Let's look at if we were to implement some of the practices such as cover crops. It may not be only for carbon and carbon sequestration. It could also be for those water quality benefits that accrue in addition to carbon sequestration. So there's a number of different factors, and there's a number of programs that actually will look to market credits against various outcomes that industries may want. Part of this is that it's not necessarily the entity which is offering the credits which will be paying producers for the practices or for the measured outcomes. Sometimes they are actually marketing those credits as this third-party intervener being able to take those credits and offering them to other industry participants who may be looking to purchase credits to be able to provide that benefit for their overall portfolio of what they're doing. Maybe it's an offset. So in that regard, there's a lot of different things to consider about just how many types of payments or different attributes that these parties may be looking for.
Many of these practices farmers are doing already. Will they get credit for these in the programs?
You know, it really depends on the structure of the program and what that entity offering those credits or payments may desire from it. We've heard anecdotally that there are some credit providers who have actually said, if you've implemented these for X number of years, we'll actually retroactively pay you for those credits. That again goes back to the fact that they have somebody who's willing to pay for practices that have already been in place. Others, it has to be a new practice that they've put into place. It has to be something which is undertaken or that can be measured going off into the future beyond what they've already done. So that early adopter question is obviously something that a number of our Iowa producers have thought about because a lot of them have taken on practices which would be deemed as environmentally preferable to some of the practices they might have done prior. So it all depends on what they've done and then again what that carbon or ecosystem climate provider would want to be able to have and what they're able to offer to others and what they're willing and able to pay for. So it's kind of like the definition of a sale. You have to have someone willing and able to sell something for a price and someone willing and able to buy something for a price. And so that's what we're trying to find right now is just what is it that they want to have and what is that price that they can come to a meeting on.
So for your virtual roundtable on July 14th, who should be involved in this? Who should participate in this?
You know, it's a great question, who should be involved, because I think what we'll find is that we've got a number of people from industries, from academia. I think we'll find a lot of media interest, and the primary target audience is actually for our producers themselves. We want to be able to find out what are the questions that producers have for these credit programs, and then we want to be able to ask those. So one of the hopes that we have is that those who enroll for this meeting and register for it would actually send us in questions that we could then ask for these providers or some of these experts that we'll have on hand and get answers for the questions that producers have front and center. That's the primary focus here, is to make sure that producers are able to get the amount of information that they need to make a well-informed decision when they look at these credit programs.
It's certainly something that farmers are interested in. Do you think this is a long-term interest of farmers, or will it be kind of a one-off thing?
Oh, I think definitely as long as these opportunities are available, there'll be producers looking at them. And obviously there's some heightened interest right now as we see more and more groups who are looking at actually paying for producers to take on certain practices. So as those come along, I think it's something that we will see more and more people have an interest in. And this one event is simply one of our early public aspects that we're going to have for producers to participate within. I anticipate that there would be several other events going out into the future, but this is just, if you will, one of those primary aspects to be able to get that information right now, because there are programs which are on the table being offered at this point in time, and it's especially important for a lot of our Iowa producers as they look right now at this myriad of programs again being offered to them, so that they're able to consider what may be in their best interest now and going into the future.
It's always good to hear from Sam. And up next, we actually have one of the 5 experts you'll be learning from during Iowa Farm Bureau's Carbon Credits Roundtable on July 14th. Shelby Myers is an economist with the American Farm Bureau, where she focuses on crop markets, farm policy, and sustainability markets. She's done a ton of research in this area of sustainability and carbon credit markets, and she even wrote a 5-part series about it for American Farm Bureau's Market Intel site. So let's check in with Shelby and see what she plans to cover during our Carbon Credits Roundtable on July 14th. Dirk Steimel takes it from here.
Hi, Shelby. You've been doing a lot of work on the economics of the emerging sustainability markets and will be a keynote speaker at our July 14th virtual roundtable. What do you see as the key opportunities for farmers in these markets, and what are some of the major challenges?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to that conference. From a farm financial perspective, these sustainability markets could potentially add diversified revenues to farms. I think these markets are providing, a voluntary market-based incentive to implement conservation practices that have been shown to be beneficial for working and retired soils. I think it's really an opportunity to get additional money to implement these practices without having to retire productive land if that's what farmers are looking at, weighing those options. So when you look at the potential challenges that come with it, though, some of that comes in the form of market logistics, broadband access, the education trial and error, some financial risks that might come along, and then even some on-farm practicality and whether or not it's a good fit for the farm.
What are some of the sustainability practices that are most likely to earn credits for farmers? And also, do you think early adopters will be compensated in these programs?
Well, some of the most common practices include things just like keeping the soil covered, minimally disturbing soil, keeping that living cover that could potentially feed the soil throughout the year, especially in areas where you get that freeze thaw, and just holding that soil in place. Some other things like diversifying cropping systems or utilizing cover crops. I know a lot of areas look at the opportunity to incorporate livestock into a cropping system and kind of play on 2 spaces for one area. A lot of these are practices that aren't new to farmers, right? They're commonly used to improve soil health, or reducing soil erosion, improving water quality, and all the other natural resource benefits that we've known to do before. Now you're just getting a little extra money to do it. When we're talking about early adopters, time will tell. Either markets will need to adapt to find ways to include early adopters, and to some extent, some have. Some of those markets really have found a way to do a look back or incorporate early adopters in some way or fashion, or the government could potentially play a role in compensating early adopters. We haven't seen yet what that'll look like, but there is potential.
Do you think these sustainability markets will themselves be sustainable? Is there a danger that these private markets could eventually dry up or could be taken over by government programs?
Honestly, I think it's way too early to speculate whether or not these credit markets will be sustainable. If you draw a business growth curve, right, and we're still in that very early stages of development, there's certainly a strong demand for businesses who are looking for these credits and are trying to find ways to be more sustainable, or, want to incorporate these strategies through their supply chains. And they're sitting at the table with organizations like American Farm Bureau and others and want to hear what U.S. farmers and ranchers need in order for these markets to be successful. At American Farm Bureau, we support the development of private markets and having the opportunity for farmers and ranchers to voluntarily choose whether a market like this is a good fit for them to participate in. And so I think the government wants to do a wait and see, and that's what we're hoping for. And we want to make sure that farmers and ranchers have the best seat possible to make happen what they need to make happen.
Many farmers have been concerned to date, from the things I've heard, that the prices of the credits does not really match what they have to spend to do these practices. Are there signals that the price could increase over time?
There's certainly market signals out there. There's supply and demand that's still being developed, and thus the price really isn't firm. It's still being developed. You hear and see a lot of the companies that are offering prices right now are trying to get the market started. And of course, there's always potential for the price to rise or fall, depending on how supply and demand develop. And so companies are researching market opportunities and making decisions based on the current market signals, just like farmers and ranchers do when it comes to our commodities. So we'll really have to wait and see how the supply and demand shakes out and what we could look forward to in those market signals.
Information sharing is also likely to be a big part of these sustainability credit markets. Do you think information sharing requirements will be onerous for farmers or could cause them privacy concerns?
Farmers and ranchers who want to participate in these markets will have to opt into some version of data monitoring and measurement, which essentially does mean some version of data sharing. It's important that farmers and ranchers read those contracts that are being offered with market enrollment and gauge for themselves their level of comfort regarding the data sharing and information reporting. That data that's needed to quantify and verify that the practices that are being used is a substantial amount of data. It will require, that special attention to detail from farmers and ranchers. I think, some farmers and ranchers have already been doing this for a while and will see no additional burden. And then there are some farmers and ranchers that this will be brand new to them and maybe an additional burden that they're not used to.
And then also there's concerns about verification. Is there a concern that the participation in these markets could cause farmers to do a lot of extra record keeping and other requirements to verify that they should be earning these credits?
Yeah, verification is being required for market participation. That's just one of the things that comes with it. Once the data is collected to quantify that these assets exist, the information also needs to be verified and to be turned into a credit that meets the requirements that are being demanded in the market. There are financial costs associated with verification, and then, as you mentioned, record keeping requirements. And that is something farmers and ranchers will need to consider as part of the participation. It's just one of the things that comes along with it. And so, as I stated earlier, some farmers and ranchers will have no problem because they've been doing this for as long as they can remember. And for some, this is a new level of record keeping that they're not used to, new business partners that they're not used to, maybe new requirements that they're submitting to that they just haven't done in the past and might find it an additional burden or might seamlessly evolve into it. I think boots on the ground and the people that are there to assist them and folks like farm bureaus that can help along the way will be essential to assisting that burden if farmers are looking for help. But it is something that they'll need to consider before signing the contract.
Are there other things that farmers should consider when they think about signing up for these markets and taking advantage of them?
As you well know, American Farm Bureau, we've put together a series of market intels to try and highlight as much information as we could about the sustainability markets. But once you have that general idea down, the next step is to really research the markets from the perspective of your own farm. Farmers and ranchers need to do their own due diligence to find a business partner that they're interested in working with, that they're comfortable working with, and that they trust, who seems appropriate given the requirements asked of these farmers and ranchers in order to participate. To definitely pay attention to the contracts that are being offered and understand, the length of commitment, the fees associated with participation, the price that's being offered for their participation. Sometimes that's explicit in the contracts. And then even the payment schedule for the credits that they generate. That's also could potentially be explicit in the contract and what you're allowed to do and when you're allowed to sell and all of those things. So this is certainly a decision that farmers and ranchers should take time to consider and assess whether or not this decision to participate in a market like this is right for them.
Well, it's a really interesting time, and we're really looking forward to this conference in July. Have you gotten a lot of questions from farmers about the situation in these emerging markets?
We've gotten a lot of questions. I think that's what spurred the market intels to begin with, is that there have been a lot of questions. And some of those have come through state farm bureaus who have reached out to us. And that's turned into a lot of smaller working groups and focus groups looking at what's being offered out there and trying to figure out how best to navigate this on behalf of farmers and ranchers. I think it's important that we're at the table when we're talking about these markets, because if they don't work for farmers and ranchers, they're not going to work at all. We're going to be the lifeblood of the success of these markets because we're the ones that are going to supply the credits. And so it's got to work for us, and anything we can do to help farmers and ranchers get the best deal possible, that's what we want to do.
Thanks, Shelby, and we look forward to learning even more on July 14th. Now it's your turn. If you're interested in learning more about the costs and benefits of private sector sustainability markets, we want you to get signed up for that virtual roundtable titled Carbon Credit Markets, What Farmers Need to Know. We've given you a link in the notes for this podcast episode to get registered, or you can head out to iowafarmbureau.com/carbon credit markets. And with that, we'll wrap up this episode of The Spokesman Speaks. But just one more thing before you go. Earlier this month, we opened up the application period for Iowa Farm Bureau's Grow Your Future Award. Grow Your Future is a program for young Iowa entrepreneurs with innovative ag businesses who'd like to compete for recognition and cash prizes up to $7,500. So if you know someone who could use that kind of support for their growing ag business, have them check out iowafarmbureau.com/growyourfuture and apply today. That's all for this episode. We hope you enjoyed it and that you'll join us for our next one on June 28th. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to The Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to The Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.